Elena Bennett had rehearsed the speech 14 times before she walked through the glass doors of Romano Holdings on a Tuesday morning in February, and by the time she stepped out of the elevator on the 22nd floor, every word of it had left her completely. She had spent 3 weeks trying every legitimate path first. 2 hospital assistance programs had rejected her application. Her bank had explained, in a letter that was polite and final, that her credit history did not support a personal loan of $93,000. The hospital's financial office had given her a payment plan that began 4 months from now, which was 3 months too late. She had called her mother's siblings, who were kind and sorry and had nothing to give. She had looked at every resource available to a 28-year-old registered nurse who made a reasonable salary and had always believed that reasonable was enough. It was not enough. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, had a cardiac condition that required a specific surgical procedure. Without it, the cardiologist had said, her prognosis within the next 6 weeks would decline significantly. With it, she had an excellent chance at 10 or more good years. The procedure cost $93,000. Insurance covered 64% of it. The remaining $35,000, plus the gap in specialist fees and the postoperative care, brought the real number to 93. So Elena had pressed her crimson blazer, put on her good heels, tucked the folder of medical documents under her arm, and walked into the most intimidating building she had ever entered in her life. She had done her research. She was not foolish enough to walk toward a man like Dante Romano without knowing something about what she was walking toward. He was the head of the Romano family, which operated in 3 cities and had interests in hospitality, real estate, and, according to careful reading between the lines of business press coverage, considerably more than that. He was 36 years old. He had inherited the family organization at 30 when his father Marco died of a heart attack. He had not been convicted of anything. He was, by most measures, exactly the kind of person a sensible woman avoided. Elena was a sensible woman. She was here anyway. The man who met her at the elevator was Carlo Santoro, who introduced himself as Mr. Romano's director of operations with no further detail. He had gray at his temples and the kind of careful stillness that came from long practice. He took the folder from her without comment and guided her through a corridor lined with framed architectural photographs of hotel properties she recognized as luxury brands. Dante Romano's office was a corner room with 2 glass walls. The harbor stretched below it, bright and cold in the February light. He was standing at one of those windows when she entered, and he turned around and she had the brief, disorienting experience of realizing she had prepared for someone menacing and found instead someone who simply looked precise. He was tall, dark-haired, broad across the shoulders in a sapphire dress shirt with the sleeves turned back at the cuffs. His eyes were dark brown and direct. He picked up her folder from the desk where Carlo had placed it and began reading without sitting down and without asking her to. Elena stood and waited. He read every page. She watched his face, which gave almost nothing away, moving only slightly as he worked through the cardiologist's report, the insurance explanation of benefits, the rejection letters, the payment plan breakdown. When he closed the folder, he looked at her again. "Sit down, Ms. Bennett." She sat across from the desk. He remained standing for another moment, then set the folder down and sat opposite her. "You need $93,000 to fund your mother's cardiac surgery, and you have not been able to secure it through conventional means. You came here because of a connection you found between my family and yours in Millbrook." He said it without judgment, simply reading back what the folder contained. "Yes. What connection did you find?" "An old newspaper mention. 30 years ago. The Millbrook Restaurant District. My grandfather owned a small Italian place there. Your father's name came up in the same article." She kept her hands still in her lap. "I thought it was worth mentioning." His expression shifted slightly, quick and internal. He looked at her for a long moment before he spoke again. "I am not in the business of personal loans." She had prepared for this. She kept her voice even. "I understand. I am prepared to discuss any arrangement that is legal and fair. I am a registered nurse with a steady income. I have no criminal history. I am asking for a loan with structured repayments. I can have my employment records and financial statements here by tomorrow morning." "That is not what I am proposing." The room was quiet. Outside, two ferries moved across the harbor. Dante Romano folded his hands on the desk and told her about the Romano Grand Hotel chain, about the investment board that reviewed his background with visible discomfort, about the specific kind of stability that a married man with a settled domestic life projected to the kinds of partners he needed for the next phase of the business. He spoke about it the way someone speaks about logistics, clearly and without decoration. 6 months, he said. You would reside in my home, attend appropriate public events as my wife, and maintain the appearance of a functioning partnership. Before you sign anything, your mother's surgical fund would be established in her name through a private medical trust, and the procedure would be scheduled. You would also receive a monthly personal stipend. At the end of 6 months, we would arrange a quiet and mutually dignified separation. Elena looked at the folder on his desk. She thought about her mother's face that morning, pale and careful, trying to smile and say she was not worried when every line of her said otherwise. I want my own attorney to review any contract. Of course. I want the medical fund confirmed and active before I put a pen to anything. That is a reasonable condition. I want it in writing that I am free at the end of 6 months with no debts, no obligations, and no consequences. He looked at her the way someone looks at a document they are deciding to trust. Then, just at the edge of his careful expression, something moved. I will have the contract ready by Thursday, he said. Elena Bennett picked up her empty folder, stood, and walked back to the elevator on steady legs. She did not let her hands shake until she was outside on the sidewalk, in the cold February air, with the harbor wind pushing against her crimson blazer. What would you do if saving the person you loved most required stepping into a world you feared completely? Comment below with what you would have done, and subscribe so you do not miss a single chapter of Elena and Dante's story. The contract was 41 pages long. Elena sat at her kitchen table on Wednesday evening with her neighbor and closest friend, Priya Solis, who was a contracts attorney at a mid-sized firm downtown. Priya had agreed to review the document with the expression of someone who suspected they were about to read something extraordinary. 2 hours later, Priya set the last page down and picked up her tea. It is actually, she said, remarkably fair. Elena had read it herself twice through. She had expected clauses that trapped her, language that gave Dante Romano leverage over her movements or decisions or future. Instead, the document was precise and contained. 6 months of co-residence at his primary address. Attendance at a schedule of events to be agreed upon, with no more than 2 per week on average. She would maintain her nursing position. She would continue her normal life in all respects other than her listed address and her public relationship status. The medical trust section occupied 4 pages. Margaret Bennett's fund covered the surgical procedure in full, all specialist fees, post-operative care, 3 months of cardiac rehabilitation, and follow-up appointments for 2 years. It was established in Margaret's name through an independent medical trust account, not accessible by Dante Romano or any Romano entity, governed by Dr. Harrington's medical office. The fund was activated upon contract signing, not upon the wedding. Elena had asked for this condition verbally and found it written into the document exactly as she had stated it. The exit clause was clean. At the end of 6 months, both parties would sign a separation agreement, cite irreconcilable differences, and proceed with a no-fault dissolution. Elena would retain the monthly stipend she had received, keep any personal property she brought into the residence, and leave with no financial claims against her and no obligations of any kind to Dante Romano or his business interests. There was one clause that Priya flagged with a small post-it note. This one, Priya said, tapping the note. Section 14. It asks that you not discuss the terms of this arrangement with any media, any business associate of his, or any legal entity not previously approved by both parties. That is a confidentiality clause, which is standard. But it also has language here about not participating in any investigation of Romano business activities for the duration of the arrangement. What does that mean in practice? It means if someone with a badge approaches you and asks you to help them build a case against him while you are living in his house, you are contractually required to decline. Priya looked at her. Not legally required. Contractually. Those are different. I am telling you what the clause says. Has anyone approached me? No. And I am not being asked to do anything wrong. No. You are being asked to be someone's wife for 6 months in exchange for your mother's surgery. The contract does not require you to do anything illegal, unethical, or harmful. Priya set her tea down. It is actually less demanding than most employment contracts I review. Elena looked at the signature page. The next morning, she signed in Dante Romano's study, at a desk that faced a large window overlooking a sunlit courtyard garden. Carlo Santoro witnessed it. Dante signed his name in the same steady hand he had used when she imagined he signed everything, quickly and without hesitation. 2 hours later, Elena received a confirmation email from the Medical Trust Administrator. Margaret Bennett's fund was active. Dr. Harrington's office had already been contacted, and a surgical consultation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Elena sat in her car in the parking garage below Romano Holdings and pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and allowed herself 30 seconds of relief that had nowhere else to go. Then she drove back to her apartment and began to pack. She brought what she would need: her nursing scrubs for work, a careful selection of the brighter pieces from her wardrobe, the emerald blouse she had bought for her last birthday, the sapphire wrap dress, the crimson blazer she already thought of as armor. She brought the photograph of her mother from the kitchen counter, the small ceramic plant from the windowsill, and 3 books she had been meaning to finish. Dante's driver, a quiet man named Raphael, arrived at 6 in the evening with a car that was large and very clean and smelled faintly of good leather. He carried her bags without being asked and held the door without ceremony. The penthouse was on the 31st floor of a building 8 blocks from Romano Holdings. The lobby had pale stone floors and large windows that faced the harbor from the east. Elena rode up in the elevator with her ceramic plant balanced on her lap and tried not to rehearse anything. The doors opened into the apartment itself, not a hallway, which meant she stepped directly from the elevator into the most beautiful room she had ever stood in. It was light. She had expected dark. She had constructed an entire imaginary space in her mind full of heavy furniture and shadows and the kind of atmosphere that belonged to the world Dante Romano came from. Instead, the penthouse was washed in the last of the February afternoon sun through floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. The floors were wide pale oak. The walls were white and hung with large framed photographs of landscapes she recognized as Italian, Amalfi, Tuscany, the harbor at Syracuse. Rosa Romano was waiting in the main room. She was a round-faced woman in her mid-60s, wearing a burgundy cardigan and a gold chain at her throat, and she walked toward Elena with the direct warmth of someone who had decided in advance to make an effort. "You are Elena," she said. "I am Rosa. I am Dante's father's sister, and I have lived in this building since before Dante moved in. My apartment is 2 floors down, and my presence here at dinner is not negotiable." She said the last part with a half-smile that softened it completely. "It is good to meet you," Elena said. "You brought a plant." Rosa looked at the ceramic pot. "Good. This apartment needs more living things. Come, I will show you the rooms." The arrangement gave Elena a bedroom suite of her own, at the east end of the apartment, with its own bathroom and a small sitting area that faced the harbor. The room was already furnished, clearly by someone who had thought about it. A lamp that gave warm white light on the reading table, fresh flowers in a blue vase on the dresser, a small coffee maker on the sideboard with 3 varieties she had not specified. She unpacked slowly and placed her mother's photograph on the dresser beside the blue vase. Dante arrived at 7:30. He changed out of his suit coat without ceremony and sat across from her at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and went through the practical list without wasting time. She was free to come and go as she needed. Her work schedule would always take priority. There were 2 events in the next 2 weeks that required her attendance: a charity benefit and a business dinner related to the hotel project. The household staff knew the nature of the arrangement and were bound by confidentiality. She should feel no obligation to perform domesticity that felt false to her. "This is your home for 6 months," he said. "I want it to function as such." "And you?" she asked. "What do you expect from me in practice?" He looked at her steadily. "Honesty, and the appearance of a good marriage when we are in public." He paused. "That is all." Elena held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at the harbor lights beginning to appear in the darkening water outside the window. The apartment was quiet around her, warm and bright. She had expected hell. She was not sure yet what this was. Elena Bennett had worked double nursing shifts through 2 flu seasons, held hands with people in the worst hours of their lives, and talked down a frightened post-surgical patient from the window ledge of room 7 on a wing that was not supposed to have windows that opened. She was not, by any measure of the word, easily rattled. The penthouse rattled her a little the first week. Not because it was threatening. It was the opposite of threatening, which was its own kind of disorienting. The kitchen was stocked with everything, and she was told repeatedly, by Rosa and by the housekeeper, Mrs. Paula, a compact Calabrian woman of fierce efficiency, that she was to use whatever she liked. The coffee maker produced something that was frankly unreasonable in its quality. There was a reading room off the main corridor lined with books in both Italian and English, and a small balcony off her own suite that faced the water and caught the morning sun. She had her work schedule, which kept her anchored. 3 shifts a week at Mercy General, where she had worked for 4 years and where nobody knew her listed address had changed. She wore her scrubs, made her rounds, administered medication and reassurance in the quantities required, and drove home each time to the 31st floor feeling the particular unreality of her situation with fresh clarity. Rosa came to dinner every evening that Dante was home, which was 4 nights out of 7. She was not intrusive. She asked Elena questions about nursing with genuine interest, talked about Italian cooking with the detailed authority of someone who considered it a serious subject, and occasionally offered opinions on Dante's schedule that he received with the patient expression of someone who had long accepted this as the terms of their relationship. "He works too much," Rosa told Elena on the 3rd evening, in a tone that suggested this was something she had been saying for years. "Since Marco died, he works like it will bring him back." "Rosa," Dante said, without looking up from his phone. "I am talking to Elena. You are looking at your phone." Rosa gestured at Elena with her fork. "He needs someone to talk to who is not Carlo." Carlo Santoro was at the apartment often during business hours. He and Elena settled into a careful mutual acknowledgement over the first week. He was polite, efficient, and made no particular effort to draw her into conversation, which she respected. On the 4th day, she brought him coffee without asking how he took it, because she had already observed him make it twice, and he looked at the cup and then at her with something that was almost surprise. "Thank you," he said. "You take it with 1 sugar," she said. "I noticed." After that, Carlo was marginally warmer. The first event was a charity benefit on a Friday evening. Elena wore the sapphire wrap dress and put her hair up and came out of her suite to find Dante already in the main room in a dark burgundy suit that she would not have predicted, but that worked entirely. He looked at her for a moment in the way that a person looks at something they have decided is satisfactory, and then said, "You look right." She did not know what right meant in his context, but she said thank you and they went downstairs to the car. He was good at it, the public version of their arrangement. He kept her close without being overbearing, touched her arm or the small of her back at intervals that felt natural rather than performed, introduced her to people with a warmth in his voice that surprised her each time because the version of him she had observed in the penthouse was considerably more economical with warmth. He laughed at something a city councilman said, and the laugh was real, and she caught herself watching his face when it happened. In the car going home, she asked him something she had been saving. "Why are you doing this?" "The transition. Not the arrangement, the business change. The hotel chain." He was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city. "Because I watched my father spend 20 years building something that cost him everything else," he said. "His health, his marriage, his ability to sleep without the lights on." He paused. "I have been doing this for 2 years. The transition, the Romano Grand is not a cover. It is where I am going. What about the people who depend on the old way of doing things? Carlo and I have been working through it for 24 months. Everyone who wanted a path out has won. Everyone who did not, I have let go." He turned from the window. "It is not as clean as it sounds, but it is real." Elena looked at the city lights streaming past the window and thought about what it meant to build something new from what was already there. Back in the penthouse, they said good night in the main corridor and went to their respective ends of the apartment. Elena sat on her balcony in her wrap dress for 20 minutes with a cup of the excellent coffee, watching the harbor. She had come here expecting a cage. What she had found was a house where someone had thought carefully about what she might need and provided it without being asked. She did not know what to do with that yet, but she thought about it for a long time. The business dinner for the Romano Grand took place on a Thursday evening in the private dining room of a restaurant that Elena would have needed 3 months of overtime to visit on her own. Dante told her beforehand, over coffee in the kitchen, what she would encounter. 6 investors, all in hospitality or adjacent real estate. 2 of them had reservations about his background, which they had expressed through their attorneys in the due diligence phase, and which had not been fully resolved. The dinner was designed to address those reservations through the simple fact of his being exactly what he said he was. A man building a legitimate enterprise with a focused plan and, now, a domestic life that projected stability. "I am not asking you to perform," he said. "Just be present. Answer questions directly if they are asked. You are a nurse. People find that reassuring in unpredictable ways." Elena wore the emerald dress she had brought from her apartment, a wrap style in deep jewel green that she had bought for a conference 2 years ago and loved immediately. She put on the small gold earrings her mother had given her and decided that was sufficient. The restaurant had warm cream walls and tall candles and wide windows that looked out over a lit courtyard. The investors were 5 men and 1 woman, all in their 50s or 60s, all with the specific ease of people who spent their time at tables like this one. They were curious about her in the way that people are curious about a new variable, assessing rather than hostile. She answered questions directly, as instructed. Yes, she was a nurse at Mercy General. No, they had not met through a mutual business contact. Yes, she found the Romano Grand project fascinating because the design philosophy was genuinely interesting from what Dante had described. But what absorbed her was watching Dante work. He was different here than he was in the penthouse. In the apartment, he was measured and quiet, a person who moved through space with deliberate economy. Here, across a dinner table from people he needed to persuade, he was warm and specific and full of detail. He knew the renovation history of the flagship building. He knew the sourcing story for the Italian marble in the lobby. He talked about the chef he had recruited from a restaurant in Bologna with a regard for the woman's cooking that was clearly genuine. When one of the investors, a cautious man from Chicago named Holbrook, asked about the long-term business plan for the Romano name, Dante answered without hesitation or defensiveness. "The Romano name has a complicated history," he said. "I will not pretend it does not. What I will tell you is that complicated histories make for specific knowledge. I know what loyalty costs. I know what trust is worth when it is real. I know that the people who build things that last are the ones who decided at some specific point that they were going to stop taking shortcuts and build them properly." He paused and looked at Holbrook. "I decided that 2 years ago. The Romano Grand is the result." Holbrook looked at him for a long moment and then nodded slowly, and that was that. In the car going home, Elena looked at Dante's profile as he scrolled through messages on his phone. "That story you told Holbrook," she said, "about deciding to build things properly." He looked up. "When did you actually decide it? What made you decide?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father died in a meeting he did not need to be in, about a deal that did not matter, because he had never let himself get to a point where he could say no." He looked back at the phone, then set it down. "I went home after his funeral and listed everything the family owned. Every legitimate asset, every building, every business connection that had a clean face. Then I called Carlo and told him I was going to spend the next 10 years turning all of it into something Marco would have been able to explain to a banker." He paused. "He said it would take 2 years. He was right so far." Elena thought about her mother, who had spent her adult life explaining Elena's father's absence with grace and without bitterness, who had said, when the diagnosis came, that she was mostly concerned about Elena having to carry this alone. "People can change what they are building toward," Elena said. It was not directed at him specifically. It was just a thought. But he looked at her as if she had said something that landed somewhere particular. The dinner had produced a preliminary commitment from Holbrook's investment group by the following Monday, which Carlo reported with quiet satisfaction. Elena heard this through the open kitchen door while she was making coffee and felt something she identified, with some surprise, as pride. Rosa Romano kept her photograph albums in a carved wooden cabinet in the sitting room of her own apartment, 2 floors below the penthouse, and she brought one upstairs on a rainy Saturday afternoon 3 weeks into the arrangement with the specific purposeful energy of a woman who has decided something is going to happen. "Come sit," she told Elena, who had been reading in the study. "I want to show you something." The album was old, its cover worn soft at the corners, its pages the thick black paper of photographs from 30 or 40 years ago. Rosa opened it near the middle and placed it on the coffee table between them. "There," she said, tapping a photograph. "My brother Marco. Your grandfather." Elena leaned forward. The photograph showed 2 men on a sidewalk in front of a storefront. The building behind them had a sign that read Bennett's Trattoria in hand-painted lettering that Elena recognized, because she had seen it in one other photograph, the one her mother kept in a frame in the hallway of the house Elena had grown up in. The same sign, the same awning in what must have been a faded red. One of the men was stocky and dark-haired, with his arm around the shoulders of the other. The other man was her grandfather's age in the only photographs she had of him, and had her grandfather's particular way of standing, chin up and slightly angled, as if he were always listening for something. "That is Thomas Bennett," Elena said. "Yes." Rosa turned the album slightly. "Marco helped him in 1993. There was a family, the Taurel Group, operating out of the Northeast Quarter, running protection fees through the restaurant district. Most of the small owners were paying and staying quiet because they did not know how to stop." She smoothed the album page. "Marco told them to stop. He told the Taurel people that the Millbrook restaurant district was outside the conversation entirely. They listened." Elena looked at the photograph for a long time. Her grandfather had never mentioned the name Romano. Her mother had never mentioned it. The connection had been erased or simply never passed on, the way certain things are not passed on, because passing them on would require explaining too much about a world the family had quietly moved away from. "Does Dante know about this?" Elena asked. "I told him 3 months ago, when he mentioned the arrangement to me." Rosa closed the album gently. "He had found the Millbrook article himself. That is why he responded when you mentioned it. He already knew your grandfather's name." Elena sat with this for a moment. "He chose me specifically," she said. "It was not quite a question. He needed someone for this arrangement who was not connected to his business world, who had a straightforward life and a good reputation, and who had a documented connection to the Romano family that could explain to someone curious how they came to know each other." Rosa folded her hands in her lap. "He looked at the Millbrook research, found the Bennett family, found you. He told me he thought it was the right fit." She paused and looked at Elena with the directness that was her most consistent quality. "I also think he liked that you walked into his office without an appointment and asked for exactly what you needed without apology." Elena thought about the folder under her arm, the pressed blazer, the prepared speech that had evaporated entirely when he turned around. That evening she found Dante in the kitchen, making coffee at an hour when coffee was unnecessary, which she had begun to recognize as his method of doing something while he thought. She sat on the stool at the island and looked at him until he turned around. "Your father helped my grandfather," she said. He poured his coffee and set the carafe down. He looked at her steadily. "Yes. And you knew that before I came to your office?" "Yes." "Then the way you reacted when I mentioned Millbrook, that was you already knowing. It was me confirming that you had found the same thread I had." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I want to be clear that the arrangement is exactly what the contract says it is. I am not asking you for anything beyond what was documented. But I want you to understand that I was not choosing a stranger at random. I was choosing someone I thought I could trust." Elena looked at the steam rising from her own cup. "Because of an old photograph," she said. "Because of what the photograph told me about the family. Your grandfather kept a restaurant. Your mother raised you without much help. You became a nurse. You walked into my office and asked for exactly what your mother needed without making it about yourself at all." He paused. "That tells me something." Elena sat at the kitchen island with the rain against the penthouse windows and the best coffee she had ever encountered and the strange, disorienting sensation of being known by a person she had expected to fear. She did not know what to do with that yet either. But she thought she was beginning to understand that not knowing what to do with something was not the same as not feeling it. The message appeared in Elena's personal email at 9:17 on a Monday morning. She was between patients at the time, sitting in the nurse's station with her phone face down on the desk because she did not check her phone between patients. She saw it when she sat down for her 10-minute break and opened it because the subject line said only regarding your husband. The sender was a name she did not recognize. V. Petrov, with a business address she did not investigate immediately. The message was short. It said that Dante Romano's transition to legitimate business was not what it appeared. That the marriage arrangement was a strategic move in a conflict between Romano and certain business partners who felt his exit was a breach of prior agreements. That Elena was being used as a public symbol in a war she did not understand, and that she should protect herself by understanding who she had married and why. It ended with a phone number and a request to meet. Elena sat with it for a long moment. The nurse's station smelled of coffee and antiseptic and the particular organized calm of a floor that was functioning well. She thought about 41 pages of contract language. She thought about her mother's surgical fund, active and confirmed and untouched by anything that had happened since. She did not call the number. She took a photograph of the email with her phone and went back to her patients. That evening, she waited until after Rosa had gone home and Carlo had left, and it was just the two of them in the main room. Dante reading something on his laptop and Elena sitting on the opposite couch with her tea. She held her phone out and showed him the screenshot. He looked at it without touching the phone. His expression did not change in any sudden way, but she saw something settle in his jaw. "Victor Petrov," he said. "You know him?" "Yes." He set his laptop aside. He runs a competing organization that has operated alongside the Romano family for 15 years. He is not someone I would characterize as a business partner. He is someone I have had to maintain a careful distance from for a long time. He looked at her directly. He is correct that my exit creates problems for him. When a family with our profile transitions legitimately, it changes the way certain relationships operate. Victor preferred the old arrangement. Is he dangerous? Dante paused, and she appreciated that he did not answer too quickly. He is not someone who would do anything to you, he said. You are too visible. The arrangement is documented. Any action against you would create precisely the kind of attention he cannot afford. He paused again. He contacted you because he thought it would destabilize the arrangement. He wants you to doubt what I am doing. Elena held her teacup and looked at him. Are you using me as a chess piece? She asked. She said it without heat, the way she asked a patient to describe their pain, wanting the accurate answer. He looked at her for a long time. When I designed the arrangement, he said, yes, it was strategic. A married man is more legible to the investment board. A wife with an independent career and no connection to my world is a signal that says something specific about my intentions. He did not look away. That was true at the beginning. And now, he was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than she expected. Now I am aware that I brought you into a situation that has more complexity than the contract describes, and that you deserve to know all of it. He met her eyes. I want to tell you about Victor in full, if you are willing to hear it. And then I want you to decide whether you want to continue the arrangement or dissolve it. The medical trust is yours either way. I will not withdraw it. Elena set her tea down on the table between them. Tell me, she said. He did. It took an hour and a half. He described the relationship with Victor Petrov's organization, the points at which their operations had overlapped, the specific way in which his legitimate transition created a vacuum that Victor wanted to fill and found he could not fill as easily because the Romano family's exit was signaling something to other families about what was possible. He described Victor's previous attempts to re-engage him in old arrangements and his refusal of each one. He was honest about the parts that were not simple. He did not make himself only the good version. When he finished, Elena was quiet for a moment. I am staying, she said. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Because I believe what you are building is real, and I am not going to let someone like Viktor Petrov use me as the reason it stops. Dante looked at her across the coffee table with an expression she had not seen on him before, open and almost undefended. "Thank you," he said. She picked up her tea. "In the morning, I want to know everything you know about what he might do next. I am not interested in surprises." The edge of his mouth moved. "Agreed. What would you do if you discovered the person who made a deal with you had been more honest than you expected them to be? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you see what happens when Victor makes his next move." The Romano Grand flagship stood on the waterfront 4 blocks from the harbor, in a building that had been a shipping warehouse in the 1890s and a garment factory in the 1930s and an empty shell for 20 years after that. Dante had purchased it 5 years ago, before he had made the formal decision to leave the old business entirely, with the vague instinct that it was the kind of building that wanted to become something worthwhile. He took Elena there on a Tuesday morning when the construction was in its final phase. She wore the crimson blazer over a white blouse and her good boots, and he wore a deep sapphire sweater and a hard hat that did not suit him at all, which she did not mention. The building was extraordinary. She had not anticipated how much. The exterior had been restored in pale stone, with the original warehouse doors converted into enormous glass panels that flooded the lobby with light from the waterfront. The interior was in its final weeks of finishing. Wide oak floors, high white ceilings that preserved the original timber frame, rooms that were designed to be warm and specific rather than generic and grand. Dante walked her through every floor. He knew the decisions behind each element the way a person knows something they have thought about for years. The kitchen supplier, the provenance of the limestone on the bathroom walls, the local artist who had done the corridor paintings on the 3rd floor. He stopped in front of a set of paintings and told her about the woman who made them, a Sicilian-American from the waterfront neighborhood who had grown up 2 blocks from where they were standing. "Why her?" Elena asked. "Because the building is from here," he said. "I want everything in it to have a connection to here." He looked at the paintings. "My father used to say that the only way to build something that lasts is to make sure the people it comes from are woven into it." He was talking about loyalty in the context he lived in. "I think the same principle applies differently." They ended in the ballroom, which occupied the full south end of the 2nd floor. The windows ran floor to ceiling and faced the harbor, and in the late morning light the room was filled with a brilliant winter brightness that made Elena stop walking for a moment. It was the kind of room that made you feel the size of a possibility. She stood in the center of it, and Dante stood a few feet away, and she said, "Tell me why you chose me specifically." Not the diplomatic version. He looked at her for a moment in the particular way he had, direct and without performance. "I found the Millbrook connection and I followed it," he said. "I found your mother's medical situation through a contact in the insurance claims system, which I will acknowledge is not something that was entirely clean. I found your employment record. I found your photograph." He paused. "I wanted someone who would not be destabilized by my world, because I have spent 2 years trying to leave that world and I did not want to bring someone into it who would be permanently changed by proximity. I thought a nurse would be grounded in reality in a way that was different from the kind of people I normally encounter." "And the photograph?" He looked at the harbor light through the ballroom windows for a moment. "You looked," he said, "like someone who had decided what she was and was not going to be talked out of it." He looked back at her. "I find that quality difficult to ignore." Elena stood in the light of the ballroom and felt the particular clarity of a moment that is going to matter. "I think," she said carefully, "that I am starting to see you differently than I did when I signed the contract." He did not fill the space after that sentence. He waited. "I am not saying what that means yet," she added. "I just want you to know that it is happening." He nodded once with the seriousness of someone who understood that this was a real thing being said. "I am also," he said, "seeing you differently." They stood in the ballroom in the full winter light with the harbor spread out behind the glass and did not say anything else for a while, which was its own kind of conversation. Dr. Harrington called at 7:43 on a Wednesday morning. Elena was in the nurse's lounge at Mercy General, between the end of a shift and the start of another, eating a sandwich she had assembled from whatever the break room offered. She saw Dr. Harrington's number and put the sandwich down and answered. The procedure went exactly as planned, Dr. Harrington said. Your mother is in recovery. She is doing well. We will move her to a room within the hour and you can see her this afternoon. Elena said, thank you, and then sat very still in the nurse's lounge for approximately 2 minutes while the relief worked through her, the way relief does after a long time of holding still against fear. All at once and from the inside out. She texted Dante before she called her mother's nurse line, which she would think about later as a piece of information about where things stood. He texted back within 3 minutes. Good. Tell me which room when you know. She arrived at the hospital at 2:30, still in her work clothes, the crimson blazer over her scrubs. Her mother was in room 412 on the cardiac recovery floor, propped up with several pillows, her silver-streaked hair spread against the pillow and her blue eyes clear and direct in the way they always were even when the rest of her was tired. There you are, Margaret said. Here I am. Elena sat in the chair beside the bed and took her mother's hand, which was warm. They talked for 40 minutes. Margaret asked about the apartment, which Elena had described in careful generalities, and asked about Dante, whom she had not yet met, in the tone of someone who had formed an opinion and was testing it. Is he good to you? Margaret asked. He is, Elena said. It was the most accurate answer she had. That is the main thing, Margaret said and closed her eyes. Elena was in the corridor outside room 412 when the elevator at the end of the hall opened and Dante Romano walked out carrying a large arrangement of pale blue flowers and wearing the expression of a man who is not certain he has made the right decision in coming but has come anyway. He saw her and stopped. Carlo told me the room number, he said. I should have asked you first. Elena looked at him in the corridor of Mercy General, where she had worked for 4 years, with the overhead lighting and the faint sound of monitors from adjacent rooms, and all the careful distance she had maintained over 2 months began to feel less like a wall and more like a habit she did not need. She is asleep, Elena said. But come in when she wakes up. She wants to meet you. He looked at her for a moment, the flowers slightly awkward in his large hands, and then nodded. They sat in the corridor chairs outside room 412 for 25 minutes while Margaret slept. Dante in his good coat with the flowers balanced on his knee, Elena with her elbows on her own knees, and they talked the way people talk when there is nothing else to arrange or perform, quietly and about things that did not require resolution. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, and who had loved the sea the way Rosa loved cooking, with a specificity that bordered on devotion. Elena told him about her father, who had not stayed, and about how Margaret had made a deliberate decision to treat his absence as a closed subject once Elena was old enough that bringing it up would only cause pain with no corresponding benefit. She sounds like a practical woman, Dante said. She is also very warm, Elena said. The combination is unusual. She will like you, probably. Why probably? Because she will ask you directly what your intentions are, and you will need to answer her honestly. He looked at the flowers on his knee. What should I say? Elena thought about the ballroom, the photograph in Rosa's album, the email from Viktor Petrov and what he had said in return, without defensiveness or revision. I think you should say whatever is true, she said. When Margaret woke up, Dante went in and sat in the second chair and placed the flowers on the side table and answered Margaret's questions with the same directness he had given Elena in the kitchen when she had asked about Victor. Margaret asked about his business. He told her about the Romano Grand. She asked how he had met Elena. He said, in a form of truth that required no embellishment, that he had found her when he was looking for something real. Margaret listened to all of it and then reached out and put her hand over his, which was resting on the bed rail, and said, You take care of my daughter. He said, Yes. In the corridor after walking to the elevator, Elena stopped and turned around. Thank you for coming, she said. He looked at her in the overhead light of the cardiac recovery floor, the reliable, ordinary brightness of a hospital corridor, and said, I needed to. She walked back to the elevator with him, and when the doors opened they both stepped in and the doors closed, and she leaned against the back wall and he leaned against the side wall, and they looked at each other and neither of them said the other thing that was true, but they both knew it was there. The meeting was called on a Thursday morning with 4 days' notice. Carlo told Elena about it over coffee, because she was at the kitchen island when the call came in and she had earned, in his estimation, the right to be informed. Viktor Petrov had sent a formal communication to the Romano Grand's investment board. The communication alleged that Dante Romano's ongoing operational history in non-legitimate business made him a liability for a publicly visible hospitality investment. It included documentation. Elena looked at Carlo across the kitchen island. "How much of it is accurate?" she asked. "Most of it describes activities from before the transition began," Carlo said. "Some of it is framed selectively. None of it is fabricated." He paused. "Victor wants the board to withdraw. And if they withdraw, the flagship financing falls apart. The Romano Grand does not open on schedule. The transition credibility is significantly damaged." Carlo was quiet for a moment. "Victor has been building this for several months. He wants Dante back in the arrangement he understands." Dante's response was to call a meeting at the Romano Grand itself. He invited the full investment board. He also invited, through Carlo, 2 specific contacts at the city prosecutor's office who had been quietly receiving information from the Romano family's transition process for 18 months. A piece of the exit strategy that he had not explained to Elena previously. The meeting took place on a Monday afternoon in the Romano Grand's conference room, which had been finished ahead of schedule specifically for events like this. The table was long pale oak. The windows faced the harbor. The room was full of afternoon light. Elena sat at Dante's right. She had not been asked to sit there. She had simply arrived and sat down, because she had decided this was where she was. Dante opened the meeting by thanking everyone for attending on short notice. Then he placed 2 folders on the table. The first contained his own operational history, prepared by the same attorney who had drafted the marriage contract, with full disclosure of every activity that occurred before the transition date and a complete account of the transition itself, including the cooperation provided to the prosecutor's office. The second contained Viktor Petrov's operational history, gathered by the same Carlo-led research process that had produced the wedding arrangement, documenting activities that were considerably less historical and considerably more current than the material Victor had submitted about Dante. "Mr. Petrov's communication to this board was accurate about my past," Dante said, looking at the investors and then at the 2 representatives from the prosecutor's office. "It was also designed to obscure his own present. These documents have already been filed with the appropriate office. What you are seeing is a copy for context." One of the investors, the cautious man from Chicago, looked at the folder and then at Dante. "Why are you doing this in front of us?" "Because transparency is the only version of this I am interested in," Dante said. "I told you at dinner 3 months ago that I decided to stop taking shortcuts and build something properly. This is what that looks like when it is tested." He paused. "You can withdraw from this investment if you choose to. That decision belongs to you. I am not managing your perception. I am giving you the complete picture." The room was very quiet. Holbrook from Chicago opened his folder, looked at the first 3 pages and closed it. He looked at Dante. "The hotel opens in 6 weeks, he said. "Yes, I will be there." The meeting concluded in 90 minutes. The investment board did not withdraw. Viktor Petrov's matter was, as Carlo would later explain to Elena with quiet precision, now in other hands and out of the operational picture entirely. On the way out of the Romano Grand, Elena walked beside Dante across the lobby floor, the pale stone catching the afternoon light from the harbor windows. She looked at his face and found it calm in a way that was different from his usual controlled composure. It was the calm of a man who had done the thing he decided to do and found it was solid when he put his weight on it. "You were not afraid of what they would find," she said. "No, because you had already given it to the prosecutor. Because I decided 18 months ago that the only way to do this correctly was to be without anything to hide." He looked at the lobby they had built together out of materials that were from here. "I have been tired of things to hide for a long time." Elena looked at the light on the stone floors and thought about what it cost to reach that. The contract expired on a Wednesday. Elena knew the date the way she knew her patients' medication schedules, not with anxiety but with the clean precision of a number that matters. She had not thought about it in the anxious way she would have expected in February when she signed. She thought about it the way she thought about a deadline that would require a clear decision. On Tuesday evening, Dante placed a single sheet of paper on the kitchen island. It was not the renewal contract. It was a one-page document, no legal language, that simply stated the original 6-month arrangement had concluded and that Elena Bennett was free of all obligations thereunder, effective the following morning. Beside it he placed the folder with the medical trust information, a summary of Margaret's recovery status, excellent, per Dr. Harrington's most recent report, and an envelope he did not explain. Then he said, "I will be in the study if you want to talk," and left the kitchen. She opened the envelope. It contained a photograph she had not seen before. It was her grandfather's restaurant, the Bennett's Trattoria sign clear in the image, taken from across the street. On the back, in handwriting she recognized as Marco Romano's from other photographs Rosa had shown her, were 3 words, "The good ones." She took the photograph and went to the study. Dante was at the desk but not working, sitting in the chair with his hands folded and looking at the window. He looked up when she came in. She set the photograph on the desk between them. "Your father kept this," she said. "He kept a lot of things. Rosa found it after he died." He looked at the photograph. "I thought you should have it." Elena sat in the chair across from his desk. The study was lit warmly, the harbor lights visible through the window behind him. She could hear the buildings quiet around them, the particular piece of a place where the tension had resolved. "I am not leaving tomorrow," she said. He looked at her directly. "Not because of the contract or because of the medical trust or because this has been comfortable." She looked at the photograph. "Because I think what you are building is something I want to be part of. And because I think what is happening between us is real, and I am not interested in walking away from real things." He was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something I should have said earlier," he said. "When I designed this arrangement, it was strategic. I told you that. What I did not tell you is that it stopped being only strategic around the 3rd week. Possibly earlier." He looked at her steadily. "Rosa told me I was hopeless, and I told her the situation was complicated. She told me the situation was only as complicated as I was making it." Elena almost smiled. "She told me something similar. She usually does." He paused. "I would like to ask you to stay, not under a contract and not because of an arrangement, but because I want you here. I would like to ask you to give me the chance to be what I have been working toward." He looked at the photograph of the restaurant. "Properly." Elena looked at him across the desk in the warm study light. This man who had read her medical bills without judgment and drafted a contract with transparent terms and come to a hospital with flowers he was not sure were right and stood in a conference room and handed over his own history without flinching. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. She nodded once to confirm it. The Romano Grand opened 6 weeks later on a Friday in late spring. The lobby filled with people in bright clothing, journalists with cameras catching the light off the harbor windows, investors who had stayed, a city councilman who had been at the charity benefit and remembered Elena from it and said so. Rosa wore gold, and stood with Carlo near the entrance, and cried in a completely unself-conscious way that Elena found deeply moving. Dante stood at the center of the lobby in a deep burgundy suit with his hand at the small of Elena's back, and when a journalist asked him what the Romano Grand represented, he said, "A decision made properly at the right time with the right person." The journalist thought he was talking about the hotel. 3 months after that, on a Saturday in autumn, Father Benetti married them in the small chapel attached to Rosa's parish, with Margaret Bennett in the front row in her best blue dress, recovered and upright and deeply satisfied. Elena wore an emerald gown that she had chosen because green had become the color she associated with the version of herself that walked into rooms and asked for exactly what she needed. Dante wore sapphire and did not take his eyes from her face from the moment she appeared at the back of the chapel. There was no contract, no arrangement, no clause about what happened at the end. Only 2 people who had found, in the middle of an unlikely beginning, something that asked nothing except that they show up for it honestly. Rosa cried again. Carlo did not cry, but he came very close, and later denied this entirely. Margaret squeezed Elena's hand at the door of the reception and said, "He is exactly what I thought he was." Elena laughed. "You only met him once." "Once was enough," her mother said. "I know how to read a person." Elena looked across the reception room at Dante, who was talking to Holbrook from Chicago and listening with genuine attention, and thought that her mother was right. Once had been enough. She crossed the room to stand beside him, in the bright autumn light, in the life they had built from an unlikely beginning and a 41-page contract and two people who turned out to be exactly what they needed.